The wind moved softly through the pines that bordered the quiet little town of Pine Hollow, brushing the tall grass in slow, sweeping waves. Autumn had come early that year, and the air carried a chill that clung gently to the skin, as if reminding folks that winter wasn't far behind. Most homes in town had their chimneys working again, a soft ribbon of smoke curling skyward from each roof like a whispered prayer. Ethan Miller lived just past the last gravel bend on the northern edge of town, in a weathered cedar cabin that once belonged to his father. The house sat tucked into the edge of the woods, where the trees grew dense and the birds quieted their song as if in reverence. From the outside, the place looked forgotten by time, paint chipped from the windowsills, porch steps uneven from years of frost and thaw, but to Ethan, it was the only place left that felt like home. Ethan was 38, tall and lean in that rangy kind of way that came from hard work and long walks. His hair, once thick and dark, now held streaks of gray at the temples, and his face carried the quiet stillness of someone who had learned how to live with sorrow. After his father passed 6 months prior, Ethan had mostly kept to himself. Folks around Pine Hollow said he was decent, just quiet. He didn't go to church, but he showed up at the general store when he needed to. He wasn't unfriendly, just distant, like someone looking out from behind a frosted window. Every morning, Ethan would rise before the sun and light the stove in the kitchen, the smell of firewood mixing with old coffee grounds. He'd sit with his mug on the back porch, wrapped in his father's old wool coat, watching the mist roll through the trees. The silence out there wasn't empty, it was full of old echoes, his father's footsteps on the porch, the creak of the screen door, laughter that used to live in the walls. Grief has a way of settling in quietly, like dust in corners. Ethan wasn't the kind to talk about his pain, but it clung to him nonetheless. Since the funeral, he'd left his woodworking tools untouched. The shop behind the cabin, once filled with the smell of fresh-cut pine and the steady rhythm of a plane gliding over wood, had fallen silent. Pine Hollow was a town that didn't ask too many questions. People waved from porches, nodded at stop signs, and understood that sometimes, a man just needed time. But even in a town that small, even in the shadow of old trees, loneliness has a way of finding its voice. And that voice, soft as it was, had begun to grow louder in Ethan's chest. He just didn't know yet that someone, or something, was about to answer it. That afternoon, the sky wore a pale gray veil, and the wind had picked up, rustling the branches like old whispers returning to finish a thought. Ethan had taken to walking the edge of his property after lunch, a quiet ritual he never spoke about, not even to himself. He didn't go far, just enough to stretch his legs and keep an eye on the fence that separated his land from the woods beyond. That day, though, something felt different. The woods weren't silent, but they were listening. He was halfway down the mossy trail behind the shed when he heard it, a sharp rustle through the underbrush, fast and heavy. He stopped in his tracks, eyes narrowing, hand instinctively hovering near the old folding knife clipped to his belt. Deer were common, the occasional raccoon too. But this wasn't either. Then it appeared. A large German shepherd burst through the brush, muddy and wild-eyed, its coat matted with dried leaves and streaks of dirt. Its fur was mostly sable, black down the back and tail, fading into rich chestnut along its legs and chest. One ear stood tall, alert, while the other flopped slightly, giving it an almost lopsided look of concern. Ethan froze, unsure whether to back away or hold his ground. But the dog didn't growl. It didn't bark or bare its teeth. Instead, it looked directly at him, straight into him, with a gaze so intense, it was as if it were pleading. The dog took a few steps forward, then turned its head sharply toward the woods, pausing just long enough to make sure Ethan was still watching. Then it looked back at him again and gave a sharp, urgent whine. "What in the world?" Ethan murmured, voice barely audible. he stood there, torn between suspicion and instinct. This wasn't some stray begging for scraps. This dog had purpose. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan felt compelled to follow. With a deep sigh, he stepped forward. "All right, fella," he said. "Let's see where you want to take me." The dog took off down a narrow path Ethan hadn't walked in years, one mostly swallowed by brambles and creeping vine. Branches clawed at his coat as he followed, ducking and stepping carefully, the forest closing in around him. They went deeper than Ethan had expected, past familiar landmarks into the part of the forest locals rarely ventured, old land, folks said, filled with forgotten things. The wind quieted here. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. After nearly 10 minutes of winding trail, the dog stopped abruptly and turned, eyes fixed on Ethan with a kind of trembling urgency. Then it turned its gaze toward an old structure barely visible through the trees, wooden walls gray with age, roof half caved in, ivy crawling over the doorframe. An abandoned house. Ethan's heart beat harder. He hadn't been there in decades. And he had no idea what, or who, was waiting inside. Ethan stood at the edge of the clearing, the dilapidated house looming before him like a ghost too stubborn to fade. Its roof sagged on one side, and the once white siding was now the color of wet ash, streaked with moss and rain rot. He remembered this place from his boyhood. Locals whispered about it back then, said it was cursed, or maybe just forgotten. It had belonged to an old couple who vanished sometime in the 70s. After that, nobody came near it. And for good reason. The dog, this muddy, determined German shepherd, paced at the door, letting out another sharp whine. Its tail wasn't wagging. It wasn't trying to coax Ethan toward food or shelter. It was pointing him somewhere. Leading him. Ethan stepped cautiously onto the porch, each board groaning beneath his boots. The front door was ajar, the hinges rusted but still strong. He pushed it open, and a heavy smell rolled out, dust, mildew, something metallic beneath it all. Inside, the air felt thick. Time had gathered in the corners like cobwebs. Old furniture lay scattered and broken, as if someone had tried to leave in a hurry or hadn't made it far. Sunlight pierced through cracks in the boarded windows, casting angled beams across the dusty floor. The dog moved ahead, its steps light but deliberate, pausing only to glance back and make sure Ethan followed. They walked down a narrow hall, the floorboards creaking like old bones. Then the dog stopped at a door on the left, paint peeled, handle tarnished. Unlike the others, this one was closed tight. The dog began to scratch at it, low growls escaping its throat, not menacing, but urgent. Ethan tried the handle. Locked. He stepped back and scanned the hallway. On a rusted nail nearby hung an old iron keyring, the kind people used to keep above doorframes for safekeeping. He took it down, fingers cold against the metal, and tried the first key. No luck. The second clicked. The door creaked open an inch, and the scent hit him like a blow, stale air, sweat, and something else. Something human. He pushed the door wide. The room was small, with boarded-up windows and a cot pushed against the wall. On that cot lay a man, unconscious, pale, and unmoving, except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. His clothes were torn, one arm bent awkwardly beneath him. His face was bruised, lips cracked, hair matted with dried blood. Ethan's breath caught. "Hey! Hey, can you hear me?" No response. The dog stood beside him, panting quietly, as if relieved Ethan had finally seen what it had tried so hard to reveal. Ethan pulled out his old satellite phone, signal weak, but there. "Yeah, I need emergency medical," he said quickly. "Male, mid-40s, unconscious. Found in a locked room off Forest Route 12. Hurry. He looked down at the man, then at the dog. You saved his life, didn't you? The dog sat beside the cot, silent now, as if its work had just begun. The sound of the chopper came low and distant at first, echoing through the canopy of trees like a memory struggling to return. By the time the paramedics arrived, boots crunching through dead leaves and voices sharp with purpose, Ethan had managed to cover the man with an old blanket he found in a trunk near the door. The house had offered little comfort, but the dog hadn't left the man's side once. The medics worked fast. One of them, a younger man with steady hands and a tight jaw, crouched beside the cot and checked for vitals. He's dehydrated. Pulse is thready but stable. Looks like a concussion, possible broken rib. We've seen worse. What was he doing out here? Another medic asked as they strapped the unconscious man onto a stretcher. Ethan shook his head. I don't know. I just followed the dog. They both looked at the German shepherd, who now stood quietly at Ethan's heel, tail still, eyes alert. One of the paramedics gave a slow nod, as if that made sense. Whoever he is, the medic added, that dog might have saved his life. One more night out here in this condition, and he'd be a memory. The team lifted the stretcher and carried it carefully outside. The dog followed, padding softly behind them, not once breaking stride. Ethan paused in the doorway of the ruined house, glancing back at the dusty room, at the shattered pieces of someone else's story. He knew this wasn't over. At the clearing, the helicopter's blades kicked up dirt and pine needles, blurring the trees into shadows. As the medics loaded the man, still unconscious, still nameless, into the chopper, one of them turned to Ethan. Did he say anything before you found him? No, Ethan replied. Not a word. The medic hesitated. His ID says Lucas Bennett. From Missoula. No phone, no gear, no pack. Just locked in there like someone wanted him to be forgotten. Ethan's brows furrowed. The name didn't ring a bell. But the dog, the way it had run to him, the urgency, the trust, it had known something. It had felt something. The helicopter lifted into the sky, vanishing into the fading afternoon. The woods grew quiet again. Ethan turned toward the dog. Well, Shadow, he said softly, the name coming out before he even thought it through. It felt right, like it had always belonged to the animal standing beside him. Guess it's just you and me now. The dog looked up at him, then gave a quiet huff and sat in the clearing as if to say, I'm not going anywhere. Ethan stood there for a long while, the forest sighing around them, the weight of what had happened settling into the soil. He didn't know who Lucas Bennett really was, or what brought him to that broken house in the woods. But he knew this much. Shadow had led him to a man clinging to life. And somehow, in doing so, had pulled Ethan a little closer back to his own. It took time, more than Ethan expected, for the days to feel less hollow. After the rescue, the old rhythm of his life had been stirred, subtly, but undeniably. The mornings still came quietly, with the same veil of mist draped over the trees. The coffee still brewed in that chipped enamel pot. But now, the silence in the cabin was no longer complete. There were footsteps other than his own. A second breath beside the fire. A soft thump of a tail when the wind stirred the trees just right. Shadow didn't bark much. He didn't whine, didn't beg. He was a presence more than a noise, always nearby, always watchful. At night, he lay curled near the hearth, his ears twitching at the creaks and sighs of the old house. During the day, he followed Ethan wherever he went, out to the shed, down to the creek, into town once or twice, though Shadow seemed to prefer the quiet of the woods. Ethan didn't try to train him. There was no need. The dog understood boundaries the way only someone who's known loss can. He didn't crowd. He didn't demand affection. But when Ethan sat out on the porch with his second cup of coffee, staring out at the treeline like he often did, Shadow would ease himself beside the rocking chair with a soft groan, resting his chin on the worn boards. The townsfolk began to notice. At the hardware store, Martha Kincaid had raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know you were a dog man, Ethan." He'd only shrugged. "Didn't either." And that was the truth of it. He'd never planned on it. He hadn't brought Shadow home so much as Shadow had stayed. Maybe that was how healing happened, not with some grand intention, but with something small and persistent choosing to stay by your side. Sometimes, late at night, Ethan would wake in the dark and catch the faint scent of pine and fir. Not strong. Just there, like the dog was keeping watch. In those moments, when the dreams of his father's final days came too close, or when grief rose like fog from the floorboards, Shadow's quiet presence reminded him of something simple but profound. "You're not alone." He started fixing up the woodworking shed again. Not all at once, just a little sanding here, a shelf repaired there. The smell of cut pine crept back into the air, and with it, a sense of movement, of something turning forward. Ethan still didn't talk much. But he found himself speaking to Shadow more and more, not expecting a reply, just needing to let the words out. "Wasn't planning on any of this," he muttered once, as they walked the trail behind the house. "But maybe planning's overrated." Shadow gave a soft huff, as if in agreement. And so they went on, man and dog, two quiet souls learning to live again. Not with noise or fanfare, but in the stillness of the pines, where every breath of wind seemed to whisper, "It's okay to begin again." It was nearly 3 weeks after the rescue when a tan pickup truck rumbled down the gravel path to Ethan's cabin. Dust rose behind it like smoke, the sound alone unusual enough to send Shadow to his feet, ears perked. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, one hand resting on the rail, the other holding a half-sanded cedar board. The truck door opened slowly. Out stepped Lucas Bennett. He moved gingerly, his left arm in a sling and his face still marked with yellowed bruises. But there was strength in the way he stood, measured, deliberate. Like someone who'd stared into something dark and come out the other side with new eyes. "Mind some company?" Lucas asked, his voice rough, but friendly. Ethan gave a small nod. "Don't mind it at all." They sat in quiet for a while, Shadow lying between them, tail swishing lightly against the porch boards. The autumn sun dipped lower, catching the tops of the trees in gold. Lucas held a thermos of coffee Ethan had offered him, cradling it like something sacred. "I remember this place," Lucas said finally. "Didn't realize at first, but it hit me a couple nights ago." Ethan turned toward him, curious. "My grandparents used to bring me out here. Summers, when I was just a kid. That old house in the woods? That was theirs." Ethan blinked. "The one I found you in?" Lucas nodded. "Yeah. My grandfather built it with his own hands in the 50s. Retired railroad man. After he passed, the family had a falling out, legal mess, bitterness, things better left unsaid. Place was abandoned after that. Nobody went back." He took a sip of coffee, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I guess I came looking for something. Answers maybe. Closure, I don't know. Figured I'd spend a night in the old house, see what I could find. But the floor gave way, guess the years weren't kind to it." He managed a faint laugh. "Next thing I knew, I was on my back in a locked room, with no one knowing I was there." "Except him," Ethan said, glancing at Shadow. Lucas smiled, and this time, it reached his eyes. "Except him." They sat in silence for a beat. "I keep wondering," Lucas added softly, how that dog knew. How he found someone to help. Maybe he was lost too. Ethan let that hang in the air, feeling the weight of it settle between them. "You planning to go back to Missoula?" he asked after a while. Lucas shook his head. "No. I think I'll stick around for a bit. There's more I need to understand, about the house. About what was left behind." Ethan nodded slowly. "Well," he said, "you won't find a better place for thinking." Shadow shifted slightly, pressing his head against Ethan's boot. And for a moment, the porch felt less like a place for endings, and more like the beginning of something quietly profound. The wind was crisp that morning, carrying the scent of pine and old soil as Ethan and Lucas made their way back to the house in the woods. Shadow trotted ahead, weaving through ferns and fallen branches like he knew the path better than either of them. The forest, silent but watchful, seemed to shift around them with every step, as if it, too, remembered the weight of the past. The old house looked even more fragile in daylight. Sunlight filtered through the broken roof, catching dust motes that danced like forgotten memories. Lucas stood at the doorway, staring up at the structure with quiet reverence. "I remember this porch," he murmured. "Grandma used to sit right there and knit while Grandpa carved birds out of pine wood." Ethan gave a soft hum of acknowledgement as they stepped inside. The floor still groaned under their weight, but the danger had passed. The collapsed beam that had nearly sealed Lucas's fate had been cleared away by a volunteer team from town. Pine Hollow had a way of taking care of its own, eventually. They explored the room slowly, Lucas trailing his fingers along faded wallpaper and dusty furniture, each object stirring a flicker of memory. Then, in the attic, they found it. A trunk, scuffed, locked, tucked beneath an old patchwork quilt stiff with time. Lucas pried it open with a crowbar Ethan had brought, and the lid creaked like an old voice clearing its throat. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, bound in brittle twine. Some were yellowed, some spotted with moisture. All were addressed in the same careful script. "To my son, Henry, Lucas's father." Lucas sat cross-legged on the attic floor, gently opening one. Ethan stayed back, letting the moment belong to him. The first letter was dated June 1973. "Son, if you ever read this, I want you to know I was wrong. Pride is a foolish thing. I didn't know how to say it then, but I do now. I was too hard on you. I let a disagreement about land drive a wedge between us that I never meant to last. If there's a way back to each other, I hope you find it." Lucas stared at the words, his hands trembling slightly. "My dad never talked about his parents," he said quietly. "Just said they weren't around. I thought they didn't care. But, this..." He trailed off, emotion thick in his throat. Ethan crouched beside him. Sometimes people leave things unsaid because they don't know how to say them. Lucas nodded slowly, blinking hard. "But he never read these. He never came back." "Maybe that's why you did," Ethan said. They sat in silence for a while, the house around them breathing with the weight of time. Outside, Shadow waited at the foot of the stairs, eyes turned toward the forest, as if guarding not just the men, but the stories they had come to reclaim. And somewhere, deep in those old walls, forgiveness finally found a place to rest. The days that followed were quiet but full in a way Lucas hadn't known in years. He rented a small room above the Pine Hollow General Store, a modest space with creaky floorboards and a view of the old clock tower. The townsfolk, cautious at first, soon warmed to him. Maybe it was the way he asked questions, listening more than he spoke, or how he remembered names after a single introduction. But mostly, it was the way he showed up, present, steady, like he wasn't just passing through. Each morning, Lucas drove out to the old house. With Ethan's help, and a few volunteers who remembered the Bennetts from long ago, He began cleaning the place out, board by board, nail by stubborn nail. What had once been a ruin started to breathe again. Not quickly, not completely, but enough to stir the sense that maybe the past wasn't beyond repair. He didn't plan to restore it perfectly. That wasn't the goal. He wanted it to feel lived in, like memory and present could sit side by side without tension. The living room would stay simple, the fireplace rebuilt from the original stone. The attic, where he had read his grandfather's letter, would become a writing nook, bathed in afternoon light. Lucas started journaling again. Not for work, not for anyone else, just for himself. The words came slowly, like thawing rivers. Sometimes he wrote about his family, sometimes about the silence of the forest, and sometimes, more often than he expected, he wrote about the dog. Shadow had become a constant during the renovations. Though he technically belonged to Ethan, he often split his time between them, choosing loyalties not by ownership but by instinct. Lucas found comfort in his presence, the way the dog would sit beside him in the shade, or follow him from room to room, like a guardian of old stories. One afternoon, as the sun cast golden bars across the floor, Lucas stood in the doorway of the house with a cup of coffee and looked out at the trees. "I used to think I didn't come from much," he said to Ethan, who leaned against the porch rail beside him. "But now it feels like maybe I came from more than I realized." "Hurt, yes, but also hope." Ethan nodded. "A lot of us carry pieces we don't understand until later." Lucas glanced back at the house, at the peeling paint and half-sanded window frames. "I think I'll stay," he said. "Turn this place into something that matters. Maybe a small community library, maybe a place for folks to sit and remember. I'm not sure yet." Ethan smiled faintly. "You've got time to figure it out." And standing there, shoulder to shoulder in the fading light, it was clear the past hadn't been erased. It had simply been waiting for someone to listen, to learn, and to build again. And for the first time in years, Lucas Bennett didn't feel like a man running from his story. He felt like a man finally writing it. By winter's first snowfall, Shadow had become more than just a companion, he was part of the fabric of Pine Hollow. People didn't ask much about where he came from anymore. Stories had started to form on their own. Some said he was a rescue from a ranger's outpost, others swore he was a trained search dog that had lost his unit and found new purpose. But the truth was simpler, and perhaps more extraordinary. No one claimed him. No chip, no collar, no missing posters. Nothing in the town records, nothing in the surrounding counties. It was as if he'd simply walked out of the forest the day Ethan needed him most. Ethan had tried, at first, to keep a certain distance. Old habits die hard, and he wasn't quick to name things his. But that changed the night he found himself whittling by the fireplace, Shadow curled up at his feet, one ear twitching as the logs crackled. Without thinking, Ethan murmured, "You're home now, aren't you?" Shadow lifted his head, just slightly, as if he'd heard and understood. And maybe he had. He'd become a fixture at the animal rescue shelter too, though not as a rescue, but as a quiet helper. Ethan had started volunteering there every other weekend, helping repair fences, clean kennels, and walk the dogs that came through. Shadow would follow him from pen to pen, stopping to press his nose to each gate, somehow calming even the most nervous animals. The shelter manager, a silver-haired woman named Carla, joked, "That dog's got a soul older than this town." Ethan believed it. There was a knowing in Shadow's eyes, the kind that didn't come from training or breeding. It came from something deeper, like he had seen sorrow, and chosen to stand in its path. Back in town, folks began greeting Shadow before they greeted Ethan. Kids would run up to scratch behind his ears, and old-timers would tip their hats when they passed him on the sidewalk. Lucas, for his part, often said that if the town ever erected a statue, it ought to be of Shadow, head high, one ear bent, eyes always looking toward the trees. "He's more than a dog," Lucas said one evening as they watched the sun sink behind the ridgeline. "He's a reminder." Ethan nodded. "That even when you're lost, someone, or something, might still come looking." And that was it. That was what Shadow had become, not a pet, not just a hero, but a living, breathing emblem of hope. In a world that often felt divided, distracted, and too fast to notice the quiet things, Shadow had brought people back to the present. He had connected the stories of a grieving man, a wounded traveler, and a town in need of remembering. He hadn't said a word. He hadn't needed to. He simply showed up when it mattered most. And sometimes, that's how the best kind of healing begins. The season turned quietly in Pine Hollow. The first heavy snow came and went, blanketing the hills in white and muting the world to a hush. The kind of hush that slows your thinking, quiets your grief, and makes room for something new to grow. Ethan found himself spending more time at the animal rescue. What had begun as a distraction, a way to pass a long afternoon, became something closer to a calling. He'd never thought of himself as the type. Yet now, each morning he left the cabin with purpose, bundled in flannel and gloves, Shadow trotting beside him, the truck bed full of lumber and supplies for new kennels. He started building again. Not just repairs, but new things. Small things. A bench beside the dog run. A feeding station for the strays that still wandered in from the woods. A shelf in the shelter's office, where people could leave notes for animals they'd adopted, thank you letters to creatures who had changed their lives. Lucas helped when he could, but much of his time was now poured into restoring the old Bennett house. His plans had grown, part living space, part local archive, part reading room. He wanted to open it to the town. A place where folks could leave a piece of their story behind, or find one waiting for them. But something deeper was changing, too. Ethan no longer walked through town with his head down. He nodded to passersby, lingered a little longer at the cafe. Some evenings he'd stop by Lucas's place for coffee and conversation. And when he talked about his father now, it was no longer only through silence or pain, but with reflection and even, on rare occasions, a chuckle. One morning, after delivering blankets to the shelter, Carla pulled Ethan aside. "You're not the same man who first walked through those doors," she said, her voice gentle but sure. Ethan looked at her, a small smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "No," he said. "I don't think I am." Outside, Shadow waited by the truck, head held high, ears twitching at the wind. There was still sadness in Ethan. That hadn't disappeared. But it had softened, made space for something else, connection. Purpose. Even joy, in fleeting, honest ways. And maybe that's what healing really looked like, not forgetting, not fixing everything overnight, but standing up in the morning, tying your boots, and choosing to care about something again. Maybe it was rescuing a half-frozen dog from a memory-soaked trail. Maybe it was following a stranger into the woods because something in your bones said don't turn away. Or maybe it was opening your door, literally and otherwise, and finding that life, however quietly, had come back. Step by step. Board by board. Word by word. And sometimes, healing walked on four legs, with a quiet bark and eyes that saw more than you could say. The snow had begun to melt by early March, exposing patches of brown earth and the first green shoots of spring pushing their way into the light. Pine Hollow stirred slowly from its winter quiet, like an old friend stretching after a long nap. And on the porch of a rebuilt house deep in the woods, three souls sat together, each changed in ways they could never have planned. Lucas leaned back in a wooden chair he'd sanded and stained himself, mug of tea warming his hands. Beside him, Ethan sat with his boots up on the railing, the lines around his eyes softer now, his shoulders less burdened. And at their feet lay Shadow, curled between them like a bridge they hadn't known they needed. It had taken time, of course. Time to peel back old griefs, to let memory settle in its place instead of ruling the room. Time to trust that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. But somehow, quietly and without ceremony, they had each begun again. Lucas had opened the house just last week, not with a ribbon cutting, but with an open door and a pot of fresh coffee. He called at the hearth, and folks had started dropping by with old journals, war letters, faded photographs tucked into envelopes. Stories in search of a home. Ethan, in turn, had begun helping full-time at the animal shelter. He'd even taken in a second rescue, a small mutt with wiry fur and a bark far too big for her size. He named her Daisy, and to everyone's surprise, Shadow took to her instantly. The two were inseparable now, like sun and shadow dancing side by side. But more than the projects, more than the community praise or the progress made, it was the quiet moments that mattered most. A shared laugh. A long silence that didn't need to be filled. The feeling that, for once, no one was carrying their burden alone. On the porch that afternoon, Lucas looked down at Shadow, who was watching a red cardinal hop along the fence line. "You ever wonder why he came to you?" Lucas asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. He watched the dog for a while, then said, "Maybe I didn't find him. Maybe he found us." Lucas nodded. Hard to argue with that. They sat for a long moment, letting the breeze carry the quiet between them. Inside the house, a kettle whistled softly. And across Pine Hollow, life moved forward, not quickly, but with purpose. The way old trees grow after a fire, their roots reaching deeper, their trunks rising straighter. In a world full of noise, Shadow had shown them something simple, that healing is real, even if it comes quietly, on four legs, with muddy paws and patient eyes. Sometimes, hope doesn't roar. Sometimes, it walks beside you, tail gently wagging, asking for nothing, and giving everything in return. The end.